Hi, Dr. Dirk. This is John Bias, and this is my monologue summary and analysis of our reading this week for Session 3 out of Speak Up, Chapters 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to do this to the best of my ability from memory. I know that's part of our grade. I do have my notes. They're on a pedestal right behind me here, so I'm going to go ahead and keep my focus on the video and try to recall all this from memory. So in Chapter 2, we'll start right out of the gate. They taught us about the 5 canons of preparing our speech, which are the invention, the arrangement, the style, the memory, and the delivery of our speech. They explained how to prepare for our speech, the fundamentals that we need to take into account as we're preparing a speech. One of them was analyzing our audience. We should come up with topics, know who we're talking to, and present information to that group of people that will keep them interested. We don't want to talk about things that are not of importance to who we're talking to. We don't want to lose people in the middle of our speech. Also, it talked about the purpose of having our rhetorical purpose of our speech, which would, in other words, be our primary goal of our speech, right? What we're really trying to convey to the audience. We want to have it focused, which comes to the next point, which is to focus on our 3, 4, maybe 5 important discussion points that we want to touch on. That keeps us structured and keeps us from bunny trailing off and going this way and that way and having people kind of just ping-ponging back and forth, not knowing what we're really talking about. You lose people in an audience that way as well. The chapter actually finished off with some helpful tips for people that have problems, me, of one, being nervous in front of an audience, how to relax, techniques that we can do to relax ourselves before we actually do our speech. And first and foremost, it just really focused on the fact that we need to really be prepared. We want to make sure that we know what we're going to say, how we're going to present it, and that'll take a lot of the nervousness out of us when we get in front of a group of people. Chapter 3, we talked about ethics, very, very important. We got to be truthful. We have to be transparent. We don't want to get caught lying, giving half-truths. We don't want to do false inferences or even omit truthful information. It states in the chapter that once we are caught lying or maybe fudging the truth a little bit, it's going to be very, very hard for you ever to regain that credibility and trust back from any audience you speak to. So you want to be very, very careful when we present information that it's been researched again, and verified. You want to know that our sources are good sources. We don't want to just go to a blog on the internet and just take some opinion-based statements and use that as our fact. We want to go to sources that are credible, people that have maybe a PhD behind them, or just anybody that might have real knowledge on a topic that can be substantiated. So it was very very informative in that aspect to really point us in that direction where we want to make sure that we do our due diligence before we start explaining something to an audience. It talked about ethical obligations and ethical speech and legally protected speech. And I believe that the example that they used in the difference between ethical speech and legally protected speech was Ann Coulter making a comment about John Edwards that was off color, and questioned on it. Was she legally right to be able to say what she said? Well, she was protected under freedom of speech, but ethically she was probably not right saying something at somebody else's expense. So we got to be able to weigh those things and make sure that when we present a speech to somebody or an audience, that we're not violating one of those 2 codes. We want to stay focused between the lines. And then we get to chapter 4, which was listening skills, which was something that really hit home for me because I do meetings every Tuesday in front of 35 of my guys who they're my core employees that report to me, but I also have in the audience the owner, our HR director. We have department heads from other departments within our company. So they're up there watching and taking notes, and I've got to keep their attention as well as the 35 guys that I'm talking to. So this chapter really hit home for me. It talked about understanding the audience and the situation that they're in. And in this case, my guys come in at 6:30 in the morning, an hour early than normal. to be part of this meeting. So I need to take into account when I see a couple yawns in the audience and a couple nod offs, it's probably because it's really early in the morning for these guys. And I need to take that into account. But it also talks about how to pinpoint people in your audience by reading your audience while you're speaking. You can also read an audience by their facial expressions and by some of the tones that you might hear from feedback. Argumentative people, I have those guys in my crew who like to argue points, and we need to be able to prepare for those people. We need to understand how to address them. And it even says in the book that when we see somebody maybe not paying attention, we can actually call them out by name, and I have done that. So it really hit home for me, these things that it describes in this chapter about skills. It talks about poor listening practices, both by speaker and or audience. The unprocessed listener, who basically is a note taker, doesn't really hear what you're saying. They're more interested in catching what you say and writing it down than processing it, and it goes in one ear and out the other. The non-listening listener, who basically is wrapped up in their own head. They're not really paying attention to what you're talking about, so they kind of just miss the bulk of the conversation. We have agenda-driven speakers who are more interested in getting their point out, or in the audience, more just listening to what point they want to hear to focus on why they're there. They're not so much interested in anything else. We have the nervous listener who, the example was two people meeting for the first time, and in that dead silence, the nervous listener is going to babble and just try to fill that dead air because it's awkward. So, overall, the tips that I've gotten out of 2, 3, and 4, and how I can apply them into my everyday life was very meaningful to me. I'm going to reread these chapters again before my next meeting on Tuesday, so I can apply some of these things that I've read about and learned. And I'm going to try to sharpen my skills in front of my guys in the morning and be a more on-point leader, be more intentional with their time, be more respectful of their time, and really want to give the information out that is going to benefit them in the best possible way, so that when they're out in the field, they think about those things. I don't have those non-listeners and those unprocessed listeners. I have guys that were intentionally listening and going out and applying. So that's my goal. So again, chapters 2, 3, and 4 meant a lot to me. I hope this analysis and summary is comprehensive enough for the purpose of my monologue. And I'm going to go ahead and sign off and get ready for my speech on my paper this week. So, Dr. Dirk, thank you, and I will talk to you soon.